what needs to be the turning point if the All Blacks are going to stop this 4-match losing streak against the Springboks?
Look, I think the turning point is, we touched on it last week, the aerial game. It's been a part of the All Blacks that they've wanted to try and improve, and they've openly talked about that in the media of how they can try and rectify not only the South Africans but throughout the first part of the June series. And it's a pretty big stat that we got here. So, like, 127 kicks South Africa have had, 46 have been regained through those 127 kicks, which is a rate at 37%. Of that, 25 players are regained that. So, if it's a 15, a Fussy or a Colby, if they're kicking and chasing, they're regaining within that 37%. If you look on the other side with the All Blacks, when we are kicking, we've only regained 12 and 10% have been regained. So, I think firstly, the first part of that is how can we try and nullify that and stop the contestable game of your Grant Williams and your Pollard. That'll be a big talking point around, I guess, the preview of the South African team. But then also, Jip touched on it last week, is how can we try and put pressure on the South Africans with our own kicking game? Because if you look at those numbers there, 10% regained off 126 kicks. And yes, some of them are long, but when we have gone to that contestable game, we haven't been able to get it back. So does that depend on who we want to be able to go for the ball? Does a Caleb Clark, a Lester Fainganuku, who has just come in, do they want to be able to have an aerial winger that can do that, along with Will Jordan on the wing, possibly Ruben Love at fullback? Not too sure. So I think those questions probably do have to ask in and around how we can try and be better in that contestable space, along with also the nines nailing the kick, which is probably the most important part as well.
How much of it is selection and how much of it is approach, Chip? Like when you mentioned Caleb Clark is out, you know, he's not going to be in this game. When the All Blacks are making their selection for this game, are they thinking about the things that have gone wrong or the things that could go right?
I think they'll probably look at, okay, when the Wallabies won, what did they do well in terms, because it's not all on the them changing their style into a contestable kick to match South Africa, but I think you've got to understand that potentially going to be wet on Saturday night, there is going to be a lot of kicking, so you've got to pick the people that are going to play the best and be able to exploit the weaknesses that South Africa showed against the Wallabies. And those weren't always contestable kicks. O'Connor found some nice 50-22s, little tops kicks, Nick White, grubbers in behind. So those are all options to be regained as well. And then I think through the hands, still in the rugby DNA of New Zealand is I think one line break in the last game, two previous, they'd, even though if it's wet, can we chance our Sam? Or just get that balance between risk and reward. Because I think if you look at last year's stats, much higher line breaks, much higher offloads, much more defenders beaten and opportunities created, but less finished. And I think we've become very clinical at finishing when we get into the 22, but maybe haven't chanced our arm as much outside of the 22. So is there an element of keeping the ball in hand, and can they expose? Because that rush D did get exposed a lot from the Wallabies just by giving those bridge passes. So I think for the All Blacks, definitely you've got to know what the conditions are, and you've got to be able to match the aerial game. One, stopping South Africa, and two, regaining your own ball. But then don't go too far away from what, it's one bad result, but the rest, there's been parts of their game. If you look at that second test against France in Wellington, a lot of ball was kept in hands and it created a lot of excitement.
Also in our attack as well, I think we know that line speed pressure is going to become, they've been operating at 82% against the Australians, which isn't as a high click of what you'd probably see with the All Blacks and even the Argentinians being that high 80s or 90s. But I think it's the layered attack is going to be really important if we can get that right, because I think we are going to feel that. So we're going to know that's going to be coming. And I remember last year in the England series, the very first test match, that we knew that high line speed was coming, and probably took us a test match to try and feel it. I think you can manufacture it at training, but I think feeling that pressure, you'll see that in the first test, and we've got obviously two opportunities to do that. But I think the phase play shape on the edge, being on the same page, having a layered attack, a short ball out the back, but then also that bridge pass, little kicks in behind or crossfield kicks or bridge passes. I think being able to take those opportunities when it does come, because I think we might get 3 or 4, and if we can nail, 2 or 4 of those and score points off that, then it really gets the South Africans thinking about, do we want to be able to bring out that line pressure because we operate at a high click?
And that can be the difference, because if you look at when South Africa win, they tackle at 85%. When they lose, they tackle at 82%. And I know it's only 3% different, but in test match level footy, you only get a few opportunities, and you've got to be able to take them, which the Wallabies did so well in that first test. So those will be the fine margins that will potentially decide. And it's, if it is to be on the weather report and be wet, and you're going to have some courage to play that style of footy.
The Springboks have shown an ability to attack as well and be quite open in their play.
Now, Great stuff, Ross. I really enjoyed that question because we've got some stats here that actually show what I think we're going to get out of the Springboks. And it's going to be a pretty conservative game plan, I think. And just based on Bryn's stats there and their ability to just retain ball through contestables. But when you look at their season so far, compared to all the other tests against the All Blacks previously, the 4 tests in terms of averages, and this year, when they've won, this just makes no sense to me how the numbers are like this, but it's a pretty telling story. When they've won, they've had 5.5 line breaks on average. When they've lost, they've had 14 line breaks. So when they've lost, out of those 14 line breaks, they've only scored 1.5 points in the when entering the 22. With the 5.5 line breaks, they've scored 4. So when they're a little bit more conservative in nature, it actually leads to more victories for them. And I think, we sort of saw an adjustment after that loss against the Wallabies to go more like that. But in terms of their gain line stats, when they've lost, the gain line they had was 78%, and when they've won, 64%. So that it doesn't. I know it doesn't make sense. Like when I was reading them, I was like, man, there's a story to tell there that sometimes when they expose, and I think it was a great example of when they got out to that 17-point lead or 22-point lead, whatever it was, against the Wallabies. It was just fast ball. They were playing on top, but it did increase the errors and the turnovers. And from those turnovers late in the game, we saw Tom Wright's try. So, and if you look at those numbers, why would you not go to a contestable kick all day? So I think the numbers suggest that I don't think we're going to get a South African side that's going to chance their arm in attack.
But when an opportunity opens up, it's a South African side that can kill you.
Well, that's the thing. But so, like, the fact that they've probably gone through, Tony Brown's been there for, what are we now, in the second year? So I think they probably feel a little bit more confident if they do want to chance their arm, play with the ball in hand. So let's say if they get down by 14 points, right, for an example, and they can't go to that contestable kick so much. They have played a lot of rugby within the last 12, 24 months that they have tried to use that attack. So, but I agree with Jip. I think with what Rassie Erasmus said, the last test match that they lost, they talked around, we only kicked 6 times in the second half. So you can kind of see that their DNA, when it gets to the ability to want to be really tight, it's going to be wet, probably wet conditions at Eden Park. Pollard was big in and around with the selection around his kicking game and being able to put them in the right areas. So I agree with Chip. I think they're going to go into a bit more of a conservative style. But if the picture is there and there's an opportunity for them to play, whether they're down by 14 or 15 points whatsoever, or they feel like they want a chance around, they have shown in the last 12 to 24 months that they can have the ability to play.
And I think the other area that's interesting is the breakdown. So turnovers at the breakdown. When South Africa won, they've got 5. When they've lost, they've got 3. Again, a small margin, but it sort of shows that the importance of actually slowing ball down and turning it over. And for the All Blacks, they're exactly the same. When they've won or lost, they've averaged 6. So you can see that they're actually getting better because their previous average last year was 4. So that showing that there's an improvement in and around that breakdown turnover space for the All Blacks. So I know we're layering a lot of stats here, but it does paint a clear, well, if I was the coaches, it paints a clear picture to what the strengths are of both sides.